Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to our guest of honor, Yang Berhormat Tuan Haji Yamani Hafiz bin Musa, Deputy Minister of Finance 2, Mr. Izwan Zainuddin, Chairman of Adfim, Mr. Muhammad Prasad Hanif, Secretary General of Adfim, to Yang Mulia, Tan Sri, Puan Sri, Datuk and Datin, and to all attendees, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Adfim Women's Summit, Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. Well, thank you. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Teshu Haida Sharif, and I'll be your MC for today. And before we proceed, I would like to share some house rules, please. Please let your phones to silent. And if you need to take an urgent call, please step out. Just step out, don't go back, okay? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to the first live forum of Adfim since COVID took control of our lives in 2020. And we would like to begin by sharing some background of Adfim. The Association of Development Finance Institutions of Malaysia, Adfim, is a unique combination of development financial institutions and entrepreneur development organizations to promote synergy and collaboration toward unearthing entrepreneurship potential to serve the unserved and the underserved. The 41-year-old organization aims to provide financial inclusion and extend the services by leveraging each member's strengths in implementing the mandate given by the government to develop business from the identified economic sectors and at the same time achieving the country's socio-economic goals. It has been even more challenging for Adfim as the pandemic, as we all know, delivered a huge impact on the economy and society, not just in Malaysia, but the entire world. Even prior to the pandemic, we were somewhat behind in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Gender equality has since increased as the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a topic we have chosen to focus on today to better understand its impact on well-being and societies as well as economies in turn. Globally, women play a central role in supporting communities and societies. Their resilience and commitment have over time immemorial ensured the well-being of current and future generations. Therefore, gender equality and women's empowerment are central to develop environmental sustainability and achievement of the United Nations SDGs. Against this backdrop, we are here to consolidate as well as and share insights and experience to create a better tomorrow. We hope that the outcome of Adfim Women's Summit 2022 will help Malaysia to achieve its goals faster. Well, to kickstart the event, please join me to welcome Tuan Izwan Zainuddin, Chairman of Adfim, on stage to deliver the welcoming speech. Tuan Izwan, please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Saudari pengacara majlis. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang berhormat Haji Yamani Hafiz Musa, Deputy Finance 2, Yang Mulia Tan Sri, Datuk Sri, Datin, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me express my sincere gratitude and appreciation for the honor that I have been given to welcome you to Adfim Women's Day Summit 2022, especially to Yang Berhormat for being here today, and to fellow eminent speakers, experts, respected guests and participants. I would like to take this opportunity to thank and congratulate Adfim for organizing this event, which is very important and is timely summit, which features experts and eminent speakers in their respective fields. In conjunction with the International Women's Day 2022, with the theme of Gender Equality Today for the Sustainable Tomorrow, the objective of this program is to raise the awareness and educate DFIs and EDOs on the important issues faced in achieving the goal of gender equality and to showcase women leaders, their achievements and their journeys. Through this awareness and engagement, we hope that DFIs and EDOs would be able to design programs and adjust mandates to fulfill gender equality goals for Malaysia. Honorable guests, Yang Mulia, ladies and gentlemen, International Women's Day takes place on March 8 every year to celebrate women's rights and to inspire people to act in the ongoing fight for gender equality. It celebrates women's contribution to society, raises awareness about the fight for gender equality, and inspires support for organizations that help women globally. In this year's celebration of International Women's Day, Adfim organized this summit, not only to showcase our women leaders and their great achievement, but this summit also is in line with United Nations Sustainable Development Goal as SDG number 5, to achieve gender equality and to empower all women and girls. This goal is important as it calls for the full participation of women in the economy and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of political and social decision making. Around the world, and in all areas of life, women are reimagining, redesigning, and looking for better ways to make humanity and our planet thrive. As a whole, women's empowerment will continue to tackle the climate change, ending poverty, and helping meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. For example, in many cultures, including Malaysia, women make the majority of purchasing decisions in the households and also big ticket items. This one I have to agree. I recently, just a few days back, spoiled my daughter, and well, I got an earful for my wife. Their decisions as consumers can have a direct impact on tackling climate change. Most importantly, we can empower women to take an active role in developing technologies, frameworks, and will create cleaner energy sources and reduce waste. Inspiring women to be active participants rather than passive observers will ultimately benefit all humanity. From the summit, Adfim is hopeful to produce an outcome report which will be circulated to all DFIs. I hope that DFIs and also EDOs will be able to leverage on the knowledge that we will, inshallah, learn today and allocate resources to ensure success of SDG goal number 5. And I also hope every participant will engage with the speakers throughout the program and gain the necessary knowledge and become a powerful advocate of this goal in their organization. With that note, I would like to conclude my speech by encouraging participants to take part in all the activities and discussions during the summit. I wish everyone successful and safe and fruitful summit. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Well, thank you Tuan Izwan Zainuddin for the insightful speech. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is with honor I now invite Yang Berhormat Tuan Haji Yamani Hafiz bin Musa, Deputy Minister of Finance to deliver the officiating speech, followed by the official launch of Adfim Women's Summit 2022. Please join me in welcoming Yang Berhormat on the stage. Silakan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good morning. Yang Berusaha, Encik Izwan Zainuddin, Chairman of Adfim, CEOs of Adfim member organizations, Tan Sri, Datuk Sri, Datuk Datin, distinguished speakers and panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Alhamdulillah, all praises to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by whose grace and blessings has enabled us to be here in this morning for Adfim Women's Day Summit. I would like to thank Adfim for the honor and privilege in inviting me to officiate the summit. And a big congratulations to Adfim for organizing the summit in conjunction with the International Women's Day 2022, which I believe is done, it's not a coincidence, it's done for a noble purpose, which gels with the theme today, which is gender equality today for for a sustainable tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by commending Adfim for organizing this event. Programs like these, which are organized by a professional association, help to support the Malaysian government's policies by building closer, stronger collaborations between civil society organizations, advocacy groups, and academia. This hopefully will help to bridge systemic gaps and capitalize on the gains that have been made. Remarkably, this insight that gender equality and female empowerment as a force for economic progress is expressed ironically not by the champion of capitalism, but an icon of communism. In encouraging women to pursue education and work outside the home, Chairman Mao Zedong famously proclaimed that women hold up half the sky. It's an insinuation to how women can and do contribute mightily to the success of the economic endeavors of a nation. So with that being said, gender equality is one of the goals that have been identified by United Nations. Goal number 5, which is not only fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. The Department of Statistics Malaysia, DOSM, has released statistics on women empowerment in selected domains in Malaysia in 2021, with the overall gender equality improved to 71.4% in 2020. It was 70.9% in 2019, 1.5%. This is a positive sign. Nevertheless, it should not stop here, and I'm confident that we could do and should do better than this. The government recognizes the role of women in the decision-making process, and in this regard, with a view to strengthening governance and effectiveness of the board, we are proposing to have at least one female board member for all public listed companies in 2 stages. This initiative will be effective for blue chip companies at the beginning of this year, on the 1st of September, and subsequently by next year, June 2023, this initiative will be imposed on all the other remaining companies. Further down the future, I think the government will also find ways and continue its efforts to ensure at least 30% of managerial positions in both board of directors and management to be comprised of women. Women play a disproportionate role in responding to the virus as frontline healthcare workers and carers at home, and women's unpaid care work have increased significantly as a result of school closures and the increased needs of older people. Women are also much harder hit by the economic impacts of COVID-19, as they also disproportionately work in informal labor markets. According to United Nations, nearly 60% of women work in the informal economy, which puts them at a greater risk of falling into poverty. Women are not the only hardest hit by COVID-19 pandemic, but they are also the backbone of recovery in communities. So putting women and girls at the center of economies will fundamentally drive better and more sustainable development outcomes for all, and support a more rapid recovery and place the world back on a footing to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. If I may say so, I believe most of us here can agree that the ultimate goal for us here is to strive for an ecosystem in Malaysia where one's gender has no bearing whatsoever on one's ability to succeed. So today's event, being organized by Adfim, it has never been more relevant than now for development finance institutions, or DFIs, to focus on gender equality. The famous 2030 Agenda aims for a world where every woman and girl enjoy full gender equality. But mind you, achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls in a country comes with a cost. It's not free. So that requires a significantly increased investments. So DFIs have to come together, which I believe in the chairman punya speech, that they're going to analyze wider financing, better policies, and adaptive approaches, learning and engaging at several levels, including international organization, among Adfim members themselves, civil society, foundations, and the private sector. So it is about time for DFIs to look into financing that is dedicated to gender equality and women's empowerment in our country as one of its objectives of financing. And such dedicated financing should target areas with greatest need and where other financing is not as effective. So this includes support for women's voice and agency and reaching those women and men, girls and boys that are most at risk of being left behind. The FI should also look to explore financing with the secondary development goal of increasing gender equality and women's empowerment. And finally, if I may, I would like to recommend that even financing today that does not yet focus on gender equality should be at least aligned as a first step to a minimum standard of doing no harm to gender equality and women's empowerment. The bulk of financing of all types does not yet integrate a gender perspective and may in fact harm gender equality and women's empowerment. I think this is timely for Adfim to organize this summit to celebrate and acknowledge the contributions of our women in Malaysia in shaping the nation towards sustainable development. So I would like to congrats again to Adfim and to all participants today. I wish all of you a productive and fruitful summit. And with the holy recitation, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, it is with great honor and privilege that I officiate Adfim Women's Day Summit 2022. Sekian, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Yang Berhormat Tuan Haji Yamani Hafiz bin Musa. With that, Adfim Women's Summit 2022 has now officially begun. And OYB, please remain on stage. And we now would like to invite Encik Izwan to provide a token of appreciation to OYB Tuan Haji. Dipersilakan. Okay, terima kasih. Thank you to Yang Berhormat Tuan Haji Yamani Hafiz and Encik Izwan. Well, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we now begin our first session. Our first speaker for the day is Datuk Noripah Kamso. So let me introduce the background of Datuk Noripah. Well, Datuk Noripah was a banker for 30 years. Okay. Okay, before we proceed, I would like to welcome everyone to have a break for 10 minutes. And then we should proceed. So please allow us to escort YB. So ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a 10 minutes break. So if you'd like to go to toilet, to washroom, so please. And don't forget to come back in 10 minutes time, yeah? Don't go back.
thank the German government for inviting me to address the Security Council.
Okay, Assalamualaikum, everyone. Welcome back. And I would like to invite all the delegates and the guests to take your seats back because we will be starting in a few. Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We now begin our first session. Our first speaker for the day is Datuk Noripah Kamso. Datuk Noripah was a banker for 30 years. She previously served as chairman of Bank Kerjasama Rakyat Malaysia, advisor to CIMB Islamic Wholesale Banking, and CEO of CIMB Futures. She was the founding CEO of CIMB Principal Islamic Asset Management and pioneered the listing of the world's first regional ASEAN ETF. The common good and shared values in finance that apply to the principles of Islam, ethics, responsibility, and sustainability are universal values close to Datuk Noripah's heart. It is with this passion that Datuk Noripah and her husband co-taught Islamic finance at Drake University, USA, and they currently lecture at St. Joseph University, Lebanon. Alongside her position as Global Advisory Board member of IFN, Islamic Finance News, she was also a visiting fellow in Islamic Finance of Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies, OCIS, University of Oxford, UK, from 2016 to 2017. Datuk Noripah also wrote the globally acclaimed book, Investing in Islamic Funds, A Practitioner's Perspective, and was recognized as the most influential woman in Islamic business and finance by Cambridge International Financial Advisory in 2019. Datuk Noripah has also served as the former chairman of Bank Rakyat and currently serves on the board of Top Glove, Swift, and DXN. She is also the advisor of Bantas. Datuk Noripah will share her insights on the topic, the next normal, social justice and gender equality. Datuk Noripah, the stage is yours.
I'd like to thank the German government for inviting me to address the Security Council today on the topic of accountability for sexual violence in conflict. It is an honor to be included among such a distinguished panel of speakers. In preparing to deliver these remarks alongside Nadia, my client, my friend, and somebody I greatly admire, I thought back to a conversation we had when we first met. Nadia told me of her suffering at the hands of 12 different ISIS men who enslaved and brutalized her. She recounted the murder of her mother and brothers. She showed me threatening messages that she had received from ISIS on her phone. And as she did this, it occurred to me that she never expressed fear for her life, for her safety. Instead, that day and ever since, she has spoken of only one fear, that when this is all over, the ISIS men will just shave off their beards and go back to their normal.
Emma Clooney is a British Lebanese barrister specializing in international laws and human rights. But she is the wife of the actor George Clooney. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, happy International Women's Day 2022. Thank you, Adfim, for this invitation. Thank you to the men in this hall for bracing the endemic and be here with me today, with us today, including the men in my life, my lifetime boss, the inspiration of my life. Thank you. My keynote topic today is the next normal. My keynote topic today is the next normal, social justice and gender equality, which is in tandem with the theme, gender equality today for a sustainable tomorrow. And this is also addressed not just to all the men in this room, but also men whose call for action is needed in making social justice and gender equality happen. After all, there's this saying, all men are equal and no man is an island. Men or women, global evidence shows robustly and equivocally that societies work better when men and women are equally represented and empowered. We are humans created to lean on to each other collectively as a family and community for a harmonized journey on this panel. Ladies and gentlemen, what is social justice? Social justice refers to the concept of fairness in relations between individuals in society and equal access to wealth, opportunities, and social privileges. What is gender equality? Gender equality is when people of all genders have equal access to rights, resources, responsibilities, and opportunities. And this includes women, trans and gender, children, and families. Simply put, social justice is an action. Gender equality is the outcome. Both can translate into an economic impact of the life of the underserved and the suppressed. Allow me to begin by bringing you back 2 years ago to International Women's Day in 2020. As chairman of Bank Rakyat then, I gave my International Women's Day message from Beirut, Lebanon. Lebanon is a country close to my heart. For the past 7 years, every March, we, meaning me and my hubby, we team teach in St. Joseph University to the LLM students, and this is the French University in Lebanon. For this year, we are living on the 24th. So although Lebanon enjoyed the most vibrant feminist movements in the Arab region, Lebanon has one of the highest overall gender gaps in the world, ranking 146 of 153. Since 2012, United Nations Women has been supporting Lebanon through grant on United Nations Fund for Gender Equality. Despite the severe inequality, the women in Lebanon has no fear and are not deterred. They are very opinionated. Photo, please. In fact, in year 2020, all our students are female. Really beauty with brains. Here are our students. To the excitement of my husband. Why I'm talking about Lebanon? As I said, today, you already know that Lebanon is a failed state. You just heard Amal Clooney. She is a Lebanese. But like many of other crises around the world, the voice of women representing human rights violations and broken promises has been gaining momentum. To demonstrate the trend of these fearless women, here is Sarah Al-Yafi, a Lebanese activist and political expert. Video, please.
And in Beirut, I'm joined by Sarah Ayafi, who is a public policy consultant and political activist. Sarah, since you're in Beirut, let's go straight to you. I'd like to know, in your opinion, is the national mood one of fear right now?
I don't think fear is even remotely what it is. I think it is rage. I think it is despair wreaking havoc on the Lebanese people with immeasurable consequences, and no corrective steps have been taken by the political class. When I use the word immeasurable, I don't use it lightly, Tom. Immeasurable as in even experts are having a hard time measuring and estimating how deceitfully severe and deviously bad this crisis is, which is getting worse by the second, and still zero reforms have been undertaken. The Lebanese pound, exactly as your colleague has mentioned, has lost 85% of its value, and the central bank's reserves are drying up and very soon will no longer be sufficient to meet our import needs. Yes, import needs, because kind reminder that Lebanon is chiefly an importer. In fact, the country with the highest trade deficit in the world is Lebanon, in the world, because of the dreadful political class and the deals that they have struck with the banks, who gave zero incentives to any local business activity to prosper across the years. The unemployment rate has quadrupled. In 2019, the unemployment rate was 11%. It is currently over 40%. The inflation rate is more than 100%. Can you believe the numbers I'm giving? This is not a Hollywood movie. What does that mean? The fall of the currency created a phenomenon of hyperinflation and a severe decline in Lebanese purchasing power. The minimum income, which was already as low as $400 just a year and a half ago, has now fallen under $40. And at the same time, prices have tripled and quadrupled. Hyperinflation is a rare phenomenon in the world, Tom, but it is the daily bread of the Lebanese people. This comes at the backdrop of a country that has seen no economic growth for years due to the incomprehensible incompetence of a dreadful ruling class, a damning ruling class that has invested none of our resources on any form of productive investment or societal nation building, but instead was spending, embezzling, stealing the funds of the Lebanese people to uphold their mafia feudal kingdoms. Our deposits are trapped in banks who are the co-signatories of this crisis. The Lebanese people are obliged to withdraw their money at an extremely depreciated rate, effectively reducing the market value of our assets by 65 and soon 70 or 75%. Who knows if it'll be 100% in a few months. This means that every day, Tom, the Lebanese citizen or resident endures an effective haircut on his or her hard-earned money, even if no official policy was ever called by the state. What has the political class done to remedy to all those horrors that I just enunciated? Nothing. They have done nothing except hold on to their seats and arm wrestle, as your colleague was just explaining. They have a practicing policy of a passive laissez-faire and kicking the can at the expense of the population, of which 50% are below the poverty line. 50%. They are mafia lords, militia lords, thinking that they have the space to be bickering and infighting using the same old corrupt style that has led the country to its demise, a club of mafias and militia who embezzle the people, who explode their houses, who shoot them down if they dare demonstrate peacefully, and assault them if they dare take to the streets to ask for the most basic human rights, a damning ruling class that deigns to bring out sectarian instincts because this is all they know. It's a can of carcinogenic worms who thrive and survive in sectarian divides that brandish sectarian slogans to justify their dismal existence. Yes, the population is afraid, but more so the population is hopeless today. Hopeless. And is getting more desperate by the hour.
Okay, well, thank you so much for those very powerful opening words. I mean, a horrific situation and a horrific picture you paint for us there. And
Ladies and gentlemen, the only thing Sarah didn't mention was it's the man who largely represents Lebanese parliament who destroys the country. In the book Invisible Woman by Caroline Credo Perez, it is argued that there will be less corruption if parliament or the political landscape is equally represented by both men and women. Ladies and gentlemen, whether it's Amal Clooney or Sarah Al-Yafi or a beautiful female student at St. Joseph University, they are all beauty with brains, and I'm encouraged by the bravery. Sheryl Sandberg, former COO of Google, in her book Lean In, advocates perseverance with no fear, lean in forward, let the world hear your voice, and ignite global conversations and defend the social injustice that is going on. Women having the ability to become a complete person has a powerful role in defending human rights agenda. It is argued that women rise to the front in crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, coming out of the Gender Day at COP26 commitments in November 2021 in Glasgow, Scotland, and the Gender Equality Forum in Paris in July 2021, and the SDG Goal 5 on gender equality post the pandemic that has wreaked havoc in lives of many, I will, for the next 25 minutes, decipher women's future roles in 3 themes. Theme 1, what exactly is the next normal? Theme 2, what social justice and compliance is relevant for business? And theme 3, what exactly do we mean by gender equality and where should this apply and for what reasons? After that, I will spend the next 9 minutes before conclusion on the role of women today and in the next normal. And also I will share the World Bank Gender Risk Management Model. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to take you through some of my own thought process across 3 of these phases. Phase 1, the next normal. When the global financial crisis hit in 2008, many governments increased their spending through stimulus packages to kickstart their economies. By 2011, many had turned to drastic spending cuts and the belt-tightening austerity, which continues to today. Policy responses to the global economic crisis increasingly included drastic public spending cuts, with an overwhelmingly disproportionate effect on women and girls. Studies have shown. These political choices were partly the result of pressure from the IMF to prematurely impose expenditure cuts, a fact acknowledged by the fund's own independent evaluation office. The effects of austerity on women have been threefold. Firstly, most strikingly, cuts in public spending have reduced state provision of care services, leaving women to make up the shortfall through their unpaid care work. This reduces women's time for paid employment, political activity, or leisure, and plus further pressure on women's health. Secondly, poverty is compounded by women's roles as household and community managers, having to make ends meet. As prices rise and household incomes fail. Finally, women are hard hit by cuts of public employment, a sector where women work disproportionately and one of their few sources of relatively good quality jobs. In this endemic stage, we are seeing a repeat of the global financial crisis. It's the same impact to the women. Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, all of us here as bankers, we know a lot about going into business relating with dollars and cents. But we are surprisingly uninformed about how social structure are transforming the world around us. To appreciate the next normal, we need to understand the groundbreaking analysis of the fundamental demographic, economic, and technological trends that is rapidly remaking the world, and now accelerating under the global impact of COVID pandemic. Borrowing the summary of the book titled Praise for 2030, that was written by Professor Muro Gilland, he said, once upon a time, the world was neatly divided into prosperous and backward economies. Babies were plentiful, workers outnumbered retirees, and people aspiring towards the middle class yearned to own homes and cars. Printed money was legal. Printed money was legal tender for all debts, public and private. We grew up learning how to play the game, and we expected the rules to remain the same as we took our first job. Started a family, saw our children grow, and went into retirement with our finances secured. The world and those rules are over. By 2030, a new reality will take hold. And before you know it, there will be more grandparents than grandchildren. The middle class in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa will outnumber the middle class in US and EU combined. The global economy will be driven by the non-Western consumer for the first time in modern history. And finally, interestingly, there will be more global wealth owned by women than men. 50% of the wealth of this world will be owned by women. The woman, you might want to clap. I'm not sure if that's happy news or sad news. Having understood the mega trends, I would argue that public and private sectors should carve out this next normal through their planning at least twice a year. This is called scenario planning or foresight planning. This should be a culture inherent to all banks, businesses, and also policy making. Why? Pentagon in the US and Shell use this as their key planning tool. As a result, we see these two institutions, one in public and the other private, have a reputation to contend with globally. Ladies and gentlemen, for more than ever, it's clear that the future will be radically different than the present. As a board member of Top Glove, we have started scenario planning at Top Glove recently, drawing our scenarios, exploration of trends that requires us to navigate the seismic changes in our demography, economy, technology, and culture. We change the way we live, we work, and play for the next 10 years. We developed key strategic thrusts to address the world we may face, including diversity, inclusion, and the significance of human rights in global supply chain. As we are reminded of the shift to urbanization, changes in the gender wealth nexus, reminded of our interconnectedness and vulnerabilities, we need to identify how today's biggest trend will collide and reshape the future of everything. And this is the next normal. We saw that scenario planning is necessary for all. I would strongly encourage Adfim to instill in all FDIs in Malaysia. We have some of the largest FDIs globally, and we can take a lead on this. Secondly, still under the theme of next normal, I would put to you that a perspective of stakeholders need to expand. As banks and businesses, we once viewed shareholders as our main stakeholders, and it stopped there. It is now stakeholders activism and no more shareholders activism. Shareholder value proposition was at the front and center of all that we focused on at board meeting. That is no longer the case. Today, stakeholders like the underserved workers, like the women affected in the burnt Rana Plaza factory, which I will share in the scenario later, would trigger activist action followed by adverse media coverage and regulator sanctions, as well as consumers' boycott. In the world of business and human rights, we would map out the stakeholders and then assign salient issues relating to each of these stakeholders to our respective business areas. For instance, in the case of a bank, we would say the key salient issues for a bank would be know your client, social governance, and social justice. How deep is the human rights due diligence done on your client? You need to verify your customer's business and human rights practices is in tandem with the global supply chain, for example. So banks are powerful business vehicles to ensure United Nations guiding principles on the 10 business and human rights is being practiced. I would encourage DFIs to integrate social compliance and human rights into its credit and oversight processes, as the main role of DFIs as development banks are meant to serve the underprivileged and raise their social justice. The kind of social development needed for these times are ones where our ears are on the ground to the underserved household and communities who receive the funding. In the interest of sustainability, a good model to benchmark would be how Nestle and Unilever work out their social justice, inclusivity, diversity, and women empowerment. Now, this takes me to theme number 2, social justice and compliance. Social justice and compliance, human rights is women's rights. On 24th April 2013, the Rana Plaza building in Dhaka, Bangladesh collapsed, killing at least 1,132 people and injuring more than 2,500. This building housed 5 garment factories. Only 5 months earlier, at least 112 workers had lost their lives in another tragic accident trapped inside the burning Tazrin fashions factory on the outskirts of Dhaka. These disasters woke the world to the poor labor conditions faced by workers in the ready-made garment sector in Bangladesh. These workers were mostly women. Women who were breadwinners of their families with an average of $50 per month. It took less than 90 seconds for the 8-story building to collapse. Ensuring investigations showed a number of engineering and administrative failures contributed to the ultimate disaster of the Rana Plaza. Experts have since concluded the garment factory collapse was entirely preventable. This pointed clearly to one thing: people behind ethical and social certifications and compliance failed to prevent this disaster. Why did I choose social compliance and not sustainability collectively? The role of DFI is to enhance social development in societies on behalf of the government. It's, as you all know, a nation-building role. From a capital market perspective, considering I was an investment banker, and as an investor, say global institutional investors, we applaud Bloomberg, who since 2016 establishes an index. It's called a Gender Equality Index, a modified market capitalization weighted index that aims to track the performance of public listed companies who are committed to transparency in a gender data reporting. It measures 418 reputable public listed companies across 45 countries and regions from 11 sectors against 5 criteria, namely 1, female leadership and talent pipeline, 2, equal pay and gender pay parity, 3, inclusive culture, 4, anti-sexual harassment policies, and 5, pro-woman brand. The good news is, Top Glove today, with 3 other Malaysian public listed companies, has been included in the 2022 Bloomberg Gender Equality Index. They are included for having demonstrated outstanding performance in the area of gender reporting and measures to advance gender equality in the workplace. The other 3 are Bursa Malaysia, Maybank, and Gigi.com. 2, the public listed company being inside the Gender Equality Index means it's an enhancement in shareholder value. Share price being one of it. Thank you to institutional investors like EPF and Co-op, who are game changers to the many disturbing social injustices we are faced with today that range from forced labor, child labor, to modern slavery. Ladies and gentlemen, our global investors and buyers sadly has seen a few Malaysian industries labeled with issues of forced labor. In our vigor and excitement to drive the sustainability agenda and our rigor to get on as many global rankings as possible, let us take a step back and address real issues like human rights, compliance, and due diligence as a foundation to sound business practices. In carrying through what Hillary Clinton said, human rights are women's rights. Many institutions and businesses are still unclear about the limitations of social audits and the role of regular due diligence. As the different jurisdictions across the world make human rights due diligence a compulsory element for businesses, it is now urgent that our own business, our Ministry of Human Resource, takes the lead in this area with regulators and businesses in making this not only a culture, but a necessity for the competitiveness of our market and of our investment climate. Recent allegations that are said to have an element of social injustice, like one, Canada seizing its first shipment of goods from China, identified as being made with forced labor in November. Two, US signing into law Uyghur forced labor, you all pronounce it as Uyghur forced labor, Prevention Act, 23rd December 2021, to ensure that goods made with purportedly forced labor in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region do not enter the United States market. Then there's Japan adopting a rare resolution on 1st February 2022 to express its concerns over internment and the violation of religious freedom in the Xinjiang region. Or, in failing to resolve allegations on human rights, the United States issued WRO, or withhold release orders, against rubber glove manufacturers in Malaysia, with Canada cancelling its rubber glove orders with a Malaysian glove manufacturer. And lastly, we have also heard that UK is investigating the NHS, National Health Services, procurement of rubber gloves. Now, all these new global laws is in response to the environment, to the social, and to the governance. This should make us, as investors, sit up and take real, concrete, decisive action in where our money goes. And our investment decision should be in support of global supply chain involving social justice and how human rights due diligence is conducted before our monies are invested. As a fact check, the two scenarios are real, yeah? And the scenarios continue, albeit in varying degrees and forms to this day. So these human rights and social incompliances, when looked at in greater detail, leads me to my third theme, gender inequality. Gender inequality, what exactly we mean by gender equality? On 24th of September 2021, the United Nations reported that at least 350,209 people have been killed in the 10 years of war in Syria. This, the United Nations said, was its first official death toll since 2014. Its human rights chief cautioned the figure is certainly an undercount of the actual number of killings. A leading but unofficial UK-based monitoring group recently put the death toll at over 606,000. United Nations Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet said that those deaths, women accounted for about 8%, as did children. She added, behind each recorded death was a human being, born free and equal in dignity and in rights. She said, we must always make victim stories visible. And you saw what Amal Clooney did in the first video. She made it visible. Because the injustice and horror of these of this death should compel us to action. This is topical, yet the subject is often mired in men versus women rights. It is mired behind quotas and privileges and tokenism for women. I would like to instead frame this theme into a new trigger reflection for us all. 1. Gender equality in what area and its impact? Can we be more decisive in this? More women in boardroom or parliament or both? How do we make this attractive and what kinds of incentives should be considered? 2. Gender equality at home. How do we naturally get our husbands to come or to share household chores, including laundry and cooking, to relieve the better half, and how can this be incentive as a culture? Three, gender equality in pay and promotions. How can this be monitored, and where incriminating evidence are found, what are the whistleblowing mechanisms which protects the whistleblowers? 4, gender equality on factory floors to boardroom. Do we do this in the form of tokenism, like 30% or incentives? How can we link this to market and national prosperity? And how must we educate employers and regulators? And finally, it all begins with the all-important word education, 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 at all rungs of society. As parents, what signals are we sending our daughters and sons in the way we treat them? As teachers, what signals do we send when we discipline girls and boys? As employers, how do we incentivize men and women? I'm looking at the man in front of me. As husband, how do you incentivize your career wife? And I think we should benchmark Prince Philip in the success of Queen Elizabeth. Prince Philip was by the side of the successful Queen of England for 75 years. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm not what I am today, if not because of my husband. Shuhaimi is my Prince Philip. I slept at 10 o'clock last night, exhausted, but my Prince Philip kindly printed my script. This morning when I wake up, I found it on the table, and I was so thankful at the support that he gave. Thank you very much. And finally, as a country, how do we map the role of male and female as the foundations of economic developments? As the United Nations aptly said, gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. Ladies and gentlemen, now that we have finished the three themes, whichever way you peel the social justice issue, be that through compliance, natural disaster, wars, and/or economic meltdowns, women are often the most affected directly or indirectly. In wars like in Ukraine today, mothers, wives, and daughters mourn the potential fatal risk of their sons, husbands, and fathers, respectively. In some industries, like the fashion industry, they stand to lose by way of forced labor, as was the case in Rana Plaza incident I quoted earlier. When economies melt down post-COVID pandemic, and when the man in the household lost income, the whole families are affected. Not simply in how to maintain the household, but the expected role of mothers, wife, and daughter will be economically pressured to multitask for livelihood at the sacrifice of paid jobs. The role of women today needs to be viewed through a different set of lenses. The bigger question to ask are, 1, what are these lenses? And 2, whose responsibility is it to view this? These are fundamental questions policymakers and business leaders at national and international level need to take seriously, not only because it is topical, but more importantly because the world is going through tremendous numbers of challenges as a result of environment, social, and governance, and also the global migration and the displacement. In the face of these adversities, planets being destroyed by climate change, men and women potentially displaced globally, economies are struggling to be competitive and businesses are besieged from all directions. That we are all still talking about gender equality in year 2022, still grappling with what and where exactly we need to optimally normalize and are faced with issues of social compliance, I can safely say these themes are urgent and calling for businesses to seek action and for governments to take action collectively. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to touch quickly on gender risk management model introduced by the World Bank. I chair the Board Risk Committee at Top Glove Corporation, and using that hat, I would like to conclude my sharing today with the following thoughts on the World Bank's gender dynamics of disaster risk and resilience. Can I have the chart, please? Thank you. Data from World Bank shows that whilst natural hazards such as floods, droughts, and earthquakes are gender neutral, but their impacts are not. Men and women, boys and girls are affected or displaced differently from disaster, even if they live in the same household. These findings present challenges for disaster risk management practitioners since information on affected population is often limited to aggregated numbers and seldom goes beyond the household level. This affects institutions like banks, especially DFIs, when it extends assistance for society rebuilding. The recent flood in the Klang Valley, for instance, do we really know how women, babies, elderly, and girls were affected? The good news about Malaysia is we have established Ministry of Women, Family, and Community Development to tailor the needs of these underserved. And we also have Security Commission and Bursa strongly supporting the 30% women in the boardroom. The better we understand what drives the differentiated outcomes of disaster impacts for different populations, the better the policies and interventions can be tailored to strengthen resilience for all. I would here again encourage Adfim to take initiatives with all DFI to assess, one, the disaster impact, the orange circle. Two, if you look at gender inequality, which is the purple circle, and then you look in the overlay, that's the maroon circle between gender inequality and disaster impacts, are the factors that drive disaster impacts and are influenced by gender dynamics. This is where gender differentiated impacts happened. It is here in the overlay, gender differentiated impacts of disaster can exacerbate gender inequality, which in turn can worsen resilience to future disaster. So disaster risk management policies and intervention should operate in the overlay area, using the tools available for mitigating disaster impacts and strengthening resilience to close the gender gap in outcomes. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude my keynotes today, I ask all of us to reflect that when we do speak of gender inequality, ask ourselves, is it complemented with process findings in our organizations? Have we a process in the respective areas of business in our spheres of influence wherever we are? And in whatever role we have been given the responsibility to ascertain this inequality, the risk it carries, and our plans to mitigate them. Having the Women Ministry, Securities Commission, and Bursa Malaysia supporting the agenda is good, but We need to consider having a national disaster risk management as prerequisites, where businesses can use to consider ways in which gender dynamics influence disaster impacts in any given area before making decisions on policy or project design. In closing, knowing you have basic rights. Ladies and gentlemen, even the ladies in Saudi Arabia has progressed. I used to have business trips to Riyadh in 2012 and 2013, and I cannot forget that I was close to being beaten by the social compliance police for entering my client's office using the men's door. They have doors for men, but none for women. Because women don't work in Saudi Arabia then. Now, that said, and from that extreme, I have a host daughter, Saleha, who lives in Iceland, who keeps on reminding me by saying that, Mama, Malaysia are way behind Iceland, who as early as 1976 established Iceland Gender Equality Act. As a woman and as a woman worker, Iceland is actually the best place for women to work. Integrating all these experiences with religious reflections, I would want to borrow Tan Sri Rafida's daily reflections before we end. She said, number one, let us see the world as the Almighty has created it, with this multitude of possible scenarios, and with our own efforts and positive motivation, make the best of any situation. Second, after all, she said, every cloud has a silver lining, and there is always light at the end of the tunnel. She's giving us hope. Third, and most importantly, each one of us can be that important source of light, joy, cheer, and all things positive. In closing, I'm often reminded by my own upbringing. My late mother, who used to ride her Honda Cup at the age of 70, she used to inspire me that when we seek to change our surroundings, we need to know that we all, you, me, and every one of us has basic human rights. She used to always remind me, your rights is your life. Create your path. As a woman, nobody is going to do it for you but you. Ladies and gentlemen, in my topic today, for us to survive in the next normal, for us to practice social justice and gender equality, firstly, we need to know what those rights are, no matter your creed, culture, origin, and status in society. We are all equal against the rights assigned to us as human beings foremost and first. Secondly, and when that right is trampled upon, as we saw in the two videos earlier, we need to have individuals and institutions able to build the infrastructure in our society to defend the voiceless and the victims. Until we do this, we will continue to witness the recurring ghosts of Rana Plaza, Syrian wars, and economic crisis haunting us and our grandchildren in different forms, but with the same devastating effects and impact. Ladies and gentlemen, until we do something drastic to change the state of our societies globally on some of the points I have raised this morning, I doubt we can claim to have reached a progressive civilization. Video, please.
For a black man.
Well, from the very beginning, I didn't believe that. I mean,
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, when I arrived in Florida, everywhere I turned, that's what was being said to me. But you see, before I got to Florida, I had had the opportunity through my mother and my dad to have set some kind of foundation as to who I was. And I was not what I was required to be in Florida. I was not that. I couldn't be that. I was taught that I had basic rights as a human being. I was taught that I was someone. I knew we had no money. Still, I was taught that I was someone. We had no electricity and no running water. Still, I was taught that I was someone, you see. I had very little education. A year and a half, in fact, was all the schooling I was exposed to. Still, I knew that I was someone.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Adfim. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you so much to Datuk Noripa Kamso for the sharing. And Datuk, you know what? You look so stunning in red. You know,
Thank you.
that's just the perfect color for a dangerous woman with no fear.
Thank you.
But on behalf of Adfim, I would like to apologize for the technical issues, Datuk. It's not actually issues. We call it gimmick. Because Adfim always come up with gimmicks. You know, we have the motto that no gimmick, no issues, no fun lah. Okay, and now I would like to open the floor to all the delegates in this hall for a Q&A session. And if you have any questions, any thoughts, or anything, you may raise your hands and our secretariat members will attend to you immediately. And we will bring the microphone to you. Don't be shy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Taia. I'm from the U.S. I am a student studying in UIA, studying international and constitutional law. My question is this. You mentioned that by 2030, there will be more global wealth owned by women than men. So my question is twofold. Firstly, what will be the main contributing reasons behind the formation of this new reality? And secondly, how should businesses prepare to capture this wealth? Thank you.
Thank you. Your name is Tahia?
Taia, yes.
And you are from the United States?
Yes.
Thank you. She has two questions. The first question, what contributes to the woman owning 55% of the wealth of the world by 2030? And the second question, how would business respond to this wealthy woman? What contributes, this is from the book by Bruno himself. I can probably contribute it to 3 or 5 reasons. The first reason is baby drought. There will be fewer babies by 2030. Why fewer babies? Because the women were pursuing career, so they want less women. You're an American. The statistic in the US showed that 40% of the degree holders are women and only 32% are men. And thirdly, why there is a drought in baby, also because the wages growth is not in proportion with cost of living. So the new generation doesn't see it makes sense to have babies. Now, that said, the third reason is the largest generation in the US now is above 60. And these are the people who are above 60 that owns 80% of the wealth in the United States. So then comes to the fourth reason, you look at the man and the woman. The mortality rate for the men, they die 7 to 9 years earlier than the woman. And what does that mean? It means the wealth moved to the woman. It's also interesting, on top of that, the fifth reason, we saw that 40% of American women earn more than their husband. So when the husband died, they inherited the wealth of the husband. So those are the reasons. Now, so from a business standpoint, your second question, how do we, banks and businesses, respond in that change in wealth and demography? I think it's important to remember that gray is the new black. Gray hair, aging generation, is the new black. You probably have watched the movie Interned, played by Robert De Niro, have you? He was an intern at 70 years old in a fashion startup company. At the end of it, he was an advisor to that millennial. I mean, it just shows that the trend of the workforce also has to reach those that are above 60. So companies, I think, need to direct attention to all this aging generation, which are powerful consumers. They live in distinctive lifestyle. They are independent, autonomy, and they focus on healthcare, home care, assisted living. There could be a business that the bank could probably look at supporting. You know, they're not willing to substitute and change products in gadgets like the millennials do, so don't introduce products that kaput fast, for example. There will be care that is needed on the seniors, so you might want to look at creating robotics to support the senior homes. When these seniors actually age, one business that I saw, or one occupation, are the nurses, because they need health care and they need nursing care. Japan itself needs 1 million nurses by 2030, and this country doesn't have 1 million nurses. So that's important, yeah, intergenerational collaboration between, say, the nursing home and also, say, the students like you might want to live in a nursing home and collaborate and help while you get freedom, for example. Yeah, so I trust that helps in your question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to Tahiyya for the question. And we open one more question from the floor.
Hello, good morning. Assalamualaikum, Datuk. My name is PL, and I would like to think that this is a safe space for women to speak up about gender equality issues in Malaysia. So there are a few points which I wanted to share some of my thoughts around pertaining to the conference and also some of the issues that we're trying to peel and unpack this morning. So the first is to start with...
PL, where are you from?
I am from Malaysia. I am Chinese Malay of heritage, and I grew up in Malaysia, being a Malay Muslim woman. And I wanted to share some personal opinions, and I'm a bit nervous now, but one of the things which I wanted to share is when we talk about gender equality, it's interesting to me whereby this conference, when we started it, there was quite an emphasis around the VIPs and the protocols that we're all very familiar with. And it seemed to be that the conference places more importance on the protocols than the conversation itself, which makes me feel that this is not really the safe space for me to be able to raise some of the concerns that I have around gender equality. And therefore, I'm a bit nervous now. So that's an area which I wanted to bring up. And I hope the women here feel the same way. And the second point is on gender, on the issues and the examples that you brought. They are very inspirational. I'm very happy to learn about this beautiful brain, women with brain from all across the world, particularly in Lebanon. But my question is, as a Malaysian woman, we all also shouldn't be deprived of that opportunity. However, I feel that when there are smart, intellectual, beautiful women who speak up, talking about corruption, rent-seeking, about how the ruling class and the elite class and the political class have wronged us and have led Malaysia to where it is today, we would either be imprisoned, reprimanded, or put away, or silenced in one way or another. Therefore, that is why there are no Malaysians, beauty with brains, who can speak up. And so although you have brought many inspirational icons from outside, I want to see more local Malaysian inspirational icons that we can actually show as examples here. And the third one is, when we speak about, there were also many videos that you shared at the end, which I found very inspirational and empowered to want to do more for this country that I love very much, particularly for my children. But I feel that when we talk about freedom, we have to talk about, when we talk about freedom and equality, we have to go down to the roots and the underlying causes of why we are in this space that we are today for women in Malaysia. So I'm going to speak my mind, and I hope that I'm not going to be reprimanded. Earlier, the DPM, the Deputy Minister mentioned that we are going to have one woman in board moving forward, right? So we have that 30% women as quota. However, I hope that this will not be tokenism. A token woman in the board just to do the biddings of the Malay men in the GLCs, in the private sector. I apologize to say this, but I feel the leader who's supposed to lead women in Malaysia, our own Minister of Women and Community, is a woman who I am unable to respect because of the things that she has said at our national level. And this is a real issue that we must confront, and we must speak and dialogue. And I don't feel there are any forums, conferences, or spaces to speak about this. And so let us not suppress these underlying issues and address the issues on the surface level, inspire Malaysians through what's happening outside, but looking inwards and saying, where are the Malaysian beauty with brains? Who are there many here that I see behind me? And I'm sure they have a lot to say, but because of the protocol, the environment, no one is going to speak up. So that is my comment to you, Datuk. Thank you very much.
Round of applause for PL. Prasad, you have the next keynote speaker for your next conference. For next year, International Women's Day. PL was giving her very, not controversial, but objective comments. She's not asking any questions. We took note of all her comments, but the only part which I need to mention is two things. Number one, I am very, very happy that you were taking the videos and my experiences into your reflection and your comments. Number two, we need to make that change. If you notice, the VIPs was more focusing on protocol. You noticed I didn't. I started with ladies and gentlemen. We have to start. Yeah. If you actually read the book Lean In by Stenberg, the former COO of Google, she was highlighting that the fault is not in the man, the fault is actually in the woman. For example, 2 years ago, when I was in Edinburgh attending Global Ethical Finance, and I attend Global Ethical Finance in Scotland, Edinburgh, almost every year, except for the COVID the last 2 years. So we have a round table before the conference, and I took my seat immediately in front, but the women were all sitting at the second row of the round table. And I have to stand up and tell the woman, fill in the front. If you do not lean in and bring yourself forward and be opinionated in a round table, this is not even a conference, you're basically doing a disfavor to yourself. Correct? Correct. So, thank you, Tahiyah. So from now on, lean in. Don't wait Don't wait for the men to bring you forward. They will not do that for you, except, in my case, my husband do that for me. So, I think the comment is just exemplary and thought-provoking. We had got claps from the man in front, and thank you very much. We are all very bersemangat, yeah, to be with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to Datuk Noripah for the meaningful sharing. And before we end this, I would like to share with you the key points of your speech for today. So number one, any economic downside, women are most affected. And secondly, economic crises are detrimental to any country, and therefore every woman should be empowered. Yes, we should. And it's not sufficient empowerment in our DFI products to serve women, but also important to empower women within DFIs in leadership positions. And number four, products for gender equality should take into consideration impact factors shaped by gender dynamics. And number five, DFI should see the world and take the effort to import what is good in terms of gender equality. And once again, thank you to Datuk Noripah for sharing the meaningful for today. Okay, then I would like to call you to remain on the stage. And we would like to invite Encik Izwan to provide a token of appreciation to Datuk Noripah. Silakan. Okay, once again, thank you, Datuk Noripah, and also Encik Izwan. And ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed with the next speaker, we are going to have a 5 minutes toilet break, I call it. So please be free to do so. Only 5 minutes, yeah? And dear guests, if you would like to bring in your coffee, please do so, because we are going to do it in a casual way. So you are free to do so, yeah? Please bring in your coffee or whatever you like. Thank you. invite you to take your seats because we're going to start the second session soon. Okay, dear delegates and guests, I would like to invite you once again to your seats because we're going to start the second session in a few. Okay, everyone, welcome back. And I think everyone is ready for the next session. Okay, everyone, welcome back to Adfim Women's Summit 2022, Gender Equality for a Sustainable Tomorrow. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, ESG is a term used across sectors and industries. Are we overusing this without properly understanding or is it underutilized? Here to navigate this topic for us is Mr. Chandran Nair. Okay, before we start with Mr. Chandran, I would like to say about some background of Mr. Chandran.
Keep
Well,
it short. Yeah.
Keep it short.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Chandran Nair is a very handsome man. Okay.
That's
I think
true.
that's
True. You can go on that one, yeah.
Okay, Mr. Chandran Nair has a very diverse professional career that spans over 30 years of work across the world, from Europe to Africa and throughout Asia, including China and India. Wow.
Okay, enough. Yeah.
Okay, enough, okay?
All right, let me start. Yeah. It's okay, huh?
Yeah, I'm good.
You're good.
Okay.
Okay, can I start?
Yeah, sure, Mr. Chandran. The stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. All right. What is it? Midday, right? Yeah, it's good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Chandran. I'm going to share a few things with all of you. I see all the important people except for a few left behind. But you're the important ones, so I'm going to say a few words and share a few things with you. I'm going to speak less about gender because we already had a lot on gender. And I think afternoon you'll have a lot on gender too. And as a male, I'm not qualified really to speak about gender equality, so I will avoid the embarrassment of trying to preach about gender equality. But what I want to speak about, because it's quite well known, is gender equality has been discussed. But I want to speak about what is sustainability, because that is very poorly understood. So I really want to talk about that. But before I go into that, I'd like to also say that as a Malaysian, I applaud Pia for saying what she said. So a couple of things I would like to ask you all to do before we start. Firstly, can I have your license to be very honest? Can I? Can I have a thumbs up? Everyone, okay. So just don't hate me, okay? Because if I speak the truth, you should actually applaud me, don't hate me. Okay, so I'm going to speak some truths. Secondly, can I ask you all to put your mobile phones away? It's called old-style courtesy. No distractions. So I've got no slides, nothing. You just listen up. Put your phone away, and you will feel free. That thing is a trap. This thing is going to destroy us. I'm going to talk about that in terms of why digital technology is not the future. The future is actually not digital. It's actually biological. Everyone with me? Right? So we don't live on a digital platform as much as the Facebooks and all those pretenders try to tell us. We actually live on a biological platform. I know most of you will already feel, having put aside your phone for about 2 seconds, that is a near-death experience, but you'll be fine. Okay? Just put that thing away. If you want to tweet about me and take a picture, I'll be available after this, okay? And there's no cost. And then you can talk about, this is the best speech I've ever heard. But right now, just take that thing away. It's the digital cocaine. It will distract you from intelligent things, learning things, and it will take you into rabbit holes. So please. So a couple of things to start with, right? And I'm so pleased that I have an opportunity to speak at a development finance conference. So thank you, Prasad. Thank you very much. So my background, I started in development work in Africa. I worked there for 5 years, etc., and around the world. So I'd like to share with you some things. But I'm very intrigued, and I think you talked about some of these issues. But we in Malaysia always like to talk about stuff overseas, because we don't want to look inside here. That's a big problem, right? And Pia talked about that. Secondly, our terms of reference are always someone out there. And usually it better be Masaleh. Because if they're white people, they must be right. I know I have a black American here. You think your country is messed up? Our country is messed up too. But for our Malaysian friends, don't feel too bad. America is in worse shape, okay? So but we're going to do something to help our country. But this is a global phenomenon, so we always use reference points that are elsewhere. Look at the floods. Yesterday, I think there was heavy rain for about 1 hour. The whole system broke down. Today, there are many floods, and a month ago, it was very bad. These are all development issues, really. And we need to understand. You all work for the development finance institutions, and I'd like, hopefully in the next 30, 40 minutes, to outline to you what development should actually look like and why finance is simply a tool. The question is, what do you want to develop? Not what you want to development and finance. What is it you want to develop? And then finance is simply an instrument by which we try and essentially nurture progress, prosperity, and we have to redefine what we mean by prosperity and what is progress. So I want to say one thing, which if I didn't say, my fan club out there who's not here today will say, hey, what happened to you, Chandran? So I want to say that whilst we speak about gender equality in Malaysia, it's very important. But I noticed also the Deputy Minister talked about that your gender should have no bearing on your opportunities, yeah? That everyone should be served. So I like to think that next year we'd also have a conference where we talk about sustainability, but we also talk about racial equality. That is the biggest problem in this country too. And that I know many people don't like to talk because it's sensitive. But it's actually not as sensitive as people make out. And it's not as scary as people make out. There are people who like us to think that if you talk about racial sensitivity, you must be against Malays, you must be against Chinese, you must be against Indians. No. The world has moved on. Look at how messed up the United States is, because they never address this problem. But development is actually justice. So as much as gender justice is important in this country, we have to address the issue of racial justice and racial equality too. But that's the next topic, which I could speak about, but this is not the point I want to make today. So what is development? Development in a country like Malaysia, is Malaysia a first world country? Can I say first world? Second world? Third world? What's the United States? Third world? Huh? United States somewhere between second and third, right? What do you say, my American friend? Now, we won't put you on CNN, so you don't worry, you can speak. We're a free country here. Black people and all can speak. Second world, okay. So we are somewhere between, Malaysia is somewhere between second and third world, though we like to build tall buildings. We have a certain obsession with this. It's a male thing, you know? It's a kind of male thing. So women, please do not, in development, ever approve tall buildings. This is a male kind of thing, but I would not go into the details of this thing. But, so we like tall buildings, but you all know that most of Kuala Lumpur does not have, in fact, proper sewage systems. How many of you know this? You know, right? That's why our Klang River stinks. It's called poor development. But we want to have 5G. I won't go into the 5G thing because I heard some stuff about this. It might evolve into the new MDB, but that's a different story. Okay, we don't go there, sensitive. But we want 5G and 6G and all of this, and we want to be all interconnected. But even our sewer systems are not connected in KL. How many of you know this? So before you think that the most important technology going forward is more internet and fiber and satellites and drones, I just want to say the most important technology going forward is toilets and water supply. Betul? How many of you know this? If you don't know, you've got the digital cocaine. You are already a slave. You have no understanding of the basic science and development. You have no idea. So please wake up. Why? Development is about basic needs first. It's not about mobile phones. I agree that today the technology is so important that that kind of connectivity is probably important. But more important is the basic rights to life, which is what I talk about in my book. I noticed some people didn't even take it out of the red bag, Prasad. I mean, I think we should put it on the table, you know. But there's a book in your red bag, by the way. It's about development, right? But the development is essentially about addressing basic needs. I'm not going to talk about Africa, which I know. I'm not going to talk about India, which I know. I'm not going to talk about China, which I know, which is doing a good job, by the way, despite what you hear on CNN and BBC. All right? But we can talk about that too. But what I want to talk about is Malaysia, somewhere between third world and second world. But I think in terms of corruption scales, we're probably in the first world. We are right up there with the best. Okay, we are the best. And of course, we got the great American banks like Goldman Sachs assisting us in the plunder of our nation. We have all of those too. It's called white men helping us in the kampongs to plunder the country, right? We are number one at that. We got so smart people like Joe Low. This is not racial, by the way, though there are some racial sort of profiling to be done. But we got smart Malaysians who are all not serving the country, but you are the ones serving the country. So understand what is development. So development in Malaysia, I would go back to these 5 things. Much of it is based on understanding software. The 5 things in Malaysia for development, where development should focus on and therefore enabled by finance, and it doesn't actually have to be denominated in foreign exchange. It can be ringgit. You know, we can have ringgit bonds for drains. We need a lot of drains in this country. Everyone agree? Because we don't know what happened to the drains. As I was having a discussion with the taxi driver yesterday. All the money for the drains, even that got stolen. You know, the drains were meant to be like 6 feet wide and 2 meters deep, and then they got converted into 6 inches wide and like 2 inches deep, because even that money got stolen, right? So the floods. If you're an engineer, I'm an engineer, I know exactly what happened in this country with just drains in the capital. I don't know how many, most of you got children, right? I assume, or at least relatives. Do you know that most of the schools in the KL, Klang Valley, don't have proper toilet system and sewage? Do you know this? If you have a young kid, and a daughter especially, because guys, they can just go in the tree, right? We all know this, right? Or the Padang. But a lot of girls go to schools in the Klang Valley, first world cities apparently, twin towers. Now we'll have a triple tower, or what do we call the X something? Yeah, X something, whatever. But most of the girls can't go to the toilet. If you got a kid, a young girl, 12 years old, 13 years old, go to school with her and take the headmaster and go and check the toilet. I have a niece who goes to one of the best schools in KL, and all of our elites here pretend that they live in a first-class city and all of that. And she goes to one of the best schools in KL, and the toilet stinks. And the girls can't go to the toilet. So that is development aid. That is where money should go. That is what we should be doing. So my view is we need to go back to the basics before we start talking about all this thing about development. So what is development? Development is essentially allowing people, and in different parts of the world it's different, to escape the daily drudgery of life so that they can live with dignity. That's the first thing, dignity. And the dignity of essentially a 12-year-old girl going to school for 10 hours or 8 hours, being able to use a toilet that is safe, sanitized, and does not essentially cause environmental problems externally. We do not have this. And I would challenge the Ministry of Education, anyone, to do a complete survey of all the schools and their sewer systems and prove that I am wrong. This is true. So it is to allow people to move beyond the indignity that they suffer. Put it on the ballot sheet as, oh, they brought me back, okay. When I talk about less sensitive issues, I'm back on. Okay, I think toilets and sanitation is safe, okay? So that we need to do. So water and sanitation. Third is housing. I live half my time in Hong Kong. So there the state has completely failed because it is essentially, through a laissez-faire economic model, essentially disenfranchise the lower 60% of the population, failure of the state. Now in Malaysia, I'm also hearing that poor people find it difficult to essentially have affordable housing, right? We should have a plan where every Malaysian has the dignity of living in a proper pace, development finance, but that is not market-driven, it's public policy-driven, right? But we also need to make sure that these development plans are not done the Malaysian way. You all know what I mean by the Malaysian way? Huh? Malaysia Boleh means, you know, you're my friend, I'll give you the contract, you can take 50%, don't do anything, all of these things. So it's called actually rent seeking. So we can't do it the rent seeking way, we have to do it in policy way. The great thing about Malaysia though is we don't have constraints. We don't have a land constraint. So we don't have to price these things in the same way through the market economy. So the third thing is dignity of housing. And by that I mean the basic needs. But people should have the dignity free from the insecurity of not having a safe roof. That we can do. That too, we don't need FDI for that. Ringgit. You can print your own money and then you put the basis, the equity of that infrastructure onto your balance sheet. Then the two other things is healthcare, right? I don't need to tell you all that the one thing that we have understood from the pandemic is healthcare is number one. But healthcare starts with what food you eat, the water you drink, the conditions in which you live, also impose. And healthcare is also mental health. So healthcare, we have to revamp everything. And then two other points I want to make, energy access. So last week I was approached by a couple of Malaysians who said, hey, we are going to, can you advise us on a big solar project? And I have a fair bit of experience on energy and all of that. In Malaysia, what happens is that when there's a new trend called sustainable development, and this is why I'm speaking to you all very honestly, be careful about what the project is. So now the fashionable thing is solar. You all heard this? Right? And many of these solar projects are essentially, again, Malaysia Boleh way. Someone knows somebody, they got the permission, and then you know lah. Huh? Okay. So what happens is they see everything as an investment in GDP and therefore infrastructure. No one's thinking, well, what's the grid look like? How are we going to pay for essentially, how the consumer going to be charged? What's the tariff system going to look like? No, no, no. But the interesting thing with this project that I was told is apparently it's somewhere in Terengganu. They're going to chop a lot of forest because that's the double ticket, yeah? You cut some forest, take the timber, you get the land, you put the solar, and then, wow, next thing we know, no one's operating it, and then it's Rosmah. No, I just, oh, did I say that? No, I didn't say that. Okay, so everything happens. So I said to them, where's the tariff structure? What does it look like? What's the system? Nobody knows. But guess who? The technology is coming from Europe. So all those pious Europeans and Westerners who talk about corruption here, please, you know, they are essentially complicit in all of this because they don't care. They just want to sell the solar technology. So when you look at renewable energies, you need to be really careful. What are we talking about here? It's not just a solar field. Many of these are infrastructure, but they don't actually serve the ultimate goal of renewable energy. So you have to be very careful. And then lastly, of course, education. And I don't even want to go there because I just leave it at the toilets in the schools. But the quality of education, I think, is a development finance issue as well. Not in terms of the buildings, but in terms of the software. And that's a generational change that we have to make. So that's what I mean by what is development. So quick point about sustainable development. So there's a lot of discussion about what is sustainable development, and I just want to try and explain that in my book, I think in the chapter 2, I describe the need to distinguish sustainable development from a lot of slogans. So no one can argue against sustainable development, so everyone's got a sustainable development strategy, even the US military. I don't know what it is, but it's something about maybe carbon neutral dead Iraqis or something like this, right? Everything's got to be carbon neutral. This also is nonsense, a lot of nonsense. So let me just try and say what is sustainable development, or what it is not, and then what it is. What it is not is CSR. So most of the CSR stuff is a lot of hocus pocus stuff, because your core business essentially needs to be socially responsible. So when people say we have a CSR strategy, I think no one's really talked to them and said, you have a CSR strategy, meaning your core business is, S stands for social, right? So most of your core business is antisocial, and then you have a CSR. And you all know the CSR people, none of them have any power, right? We all know this. So the core business is antisocial, but we have a CSR strategy which is run by people who have no power. This is completely facile, no meaning. We have to discuss clearly what is it we're trying to do. And I think you mentioned, companies in Malaysia coming under scrutiny. We should not be worried about what others simply say about our malpractices or what deficiencies. We should be asking, are we good enough? We should not be living under the tyranny of other pious people who use these things to essentially bully geopolitics, etc. I live in Hong Kong a fair bit of time, so I know all the nonsense of the Americans and Europeans about China, right? A lot of it is racist and all of that. But does China need to improve some of its practices? Yes. Does Malaysia need to improve its practices? Yes. Because we should know that, for instance, take our palm oil industry. The palm oil industry is a big economic driver in Malaysia, and it's important. But does it need to be improved in the way it's run? 100%. 100%. The destruction of the biodiversity of this country in the interest of promoting that industry which is completely inefficient, we don't need someone else to tell us. Are we stupid? We know it's wrong. We know. So, again, we need to look at how we do this. I know the palm oil industry pretty well. Leave aside the biodiversity side of the losses to Malaysia, right? Just look at water pollution. I don't know how many of you have looked, as development people, looked at the data on surface water pollution in Malaysia. So if you look back, say, 30, 40 years, surface water in Malaysia, in peninsular Malaysia, was pretty good, the data, right, in terms of surface water pollution. Today, it's completely reversed. What happened? Pollution, right? Is it okay to pollute the rivers? How many people think it should be allowed? Some level of pollution is inevitable. It's called basically human beings having a footprint, right? But then we have to decide which levels of pollution are irreversible and cannot be tolerated. That, I think, needs to be, again, part of how we look at what do we finance. So many of the palm oil industry operators in different parts of Malaysia, etc., always claim that they don't have access. It's too expensive to build the wastewater treatment plants. Yeah? Can we have a national scheme whereby we essentially look at very stringent standards on discharges, right? I mean, Malaysia is what percentage of the rubber glove market in the world? Is it 70%, right? We should be proud of that achievement. But what we don't want is to then find out that whole industry is built on thin ice, right? And the thin ice is what we call the externalities of the business model, right? Can we fix it? Of course we can. But that requires a different social contract, a different development model, yeah? So you as development professionals, I feel, have such an important role to play, firstly to understand what we mean by sustainable development. What is the role of finance? In my view, a development finance institution should not have the same metrics as essentially a financial institution. It should be very different. And speaking to some people, I've understood in the development finance institutions, a lot of the metrics is also how many, I think, entrepreneurs are created. Am I right? Do you have a metrics around entrepreneurship creation? Well, not all entrepreneurs are good, you know. So just creating entrepreneurship is not necessarily a good development metrics. You understand what I mean? If you just create entrepreneurs who are essentially going to have many boats fishing off the coastal waters of Malaysia and emptying the ocean with the latest technology, that is not a development scenario you want to finance. True? You don't want to finance that development. But if you have a development scenario where you think, we have job uncertainties for lots of rural people, right? Particularly young Malay kids out in the rural areas. We need to create jobs. But if you create this myth, they can all be entrepreneurs and they can all be digital nomads, you are essentially digging a big hole and lying to everybody. I mean, I come from an entrepreneurial background. I can tell you that, you know, there are actually, most people can't be entrepreneurs. It's okay. That's why most people work in multinational companies, because they can hide in there and don't be an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is a different person. An entrepreneur is someone who eats nails for breakfast. They're the slightly gila, right? But if you have a lot of gila people and you give them a lot of money, they will do a lot of bad things too. So that's why we have rules. We have rules. So I notice all the time in Malaysia, funds for entrepreneurs and all of that. But what they mean is all the gerai and all of this. This is not necessarily development. So I come back to the food issue. Imagine 10,000 young farmers in Malaysia, funded by a development plan about food, safe and secure. Linking up with Felder and Falcra, etc., because there's a lot of land in Malaysia. Imagine then drone systems that enable them to reduce chemical usage. We can. Look at essentially soil fertility, water usage, all of those things, big data. Imagine that entire ecosystem teaming up with one of the telco providers or like Maxis, who then provide the big data. So you can be in Batu Pahat. You have 5 acres. You are growing a certain crop. You have all the data that is essentially you can buy at a minimum price from, you're not buying connectivity to watch a B movie. You know, so when I talk to some of the telco companies, etc., I said, you all talk about telecom and connectivity. Connectivity for what? Unemployed, not well educated, sitting in a small town in Pahang and watching B movies or Netflix. This is not progress, this is not development. But imagine that young kid who doesn't have a science degree, but now has data on how and what crops they can grow, but also importantly, enabled by development finance and the government, what the market prices are going to be, not for exports, but for locally as well, right? We completely changed the ecosystem. I know you spoke about the issue of labor rights, etc. in Malaysia. Most of you probably don't recognize fully, but how many foreign workers in Malaysia? Anyone want to guess? About 7 million, 3 million registered. Malaysia is the most generous country in the world. You Americans better listen up. We don't build walls, we just let them all in because we love them, right? But it's not the fault of it's not the fault of the migrants. They're just looking for work, right? We have to treat them fairly. But what it has done from a development point of view is distorted the complete economy of the country. That's why your roti chana in Bangsa costs 150. It's underpriced because it's slave labor, underpriced labor, and all the pricing of the food materials is cheap. 25 Bangladeshis living in a small house in Bangsa. Human rights violations, right? So all this distorts. But what it also distorts is young Malaysians don't think they should do the hard work. You have to start somewhere. If you don't have a job, it's okay to clean dishes. True or not? Yeah. Everything is dignity. It's okay. You work hard. But I know so many Malaysians who don't want to do because they got used to the idea that the person who does that work is a coolie, is a Bangla, is Indonesian. It's not my job. Well, actually, it's your job too. It's dignified, it's honest, it's all right. And then the salaries will change because we can have basic wage issues. I don't want to name the restaurants in Bangsa in my neighborhood because this is on TV, right? The last time I spoke on Astro, it was so honest, they took it down. This is for Astro, by the way. They took it down. But what I'm trying to say is, then we will understand why the pricing changes. And that is development finance too. So let me kind of conclude with a couple of remarks. So sustainable development, you've got to understand, is about firstly understanding what are your development priorities. It's not slogans. It's not about planting trees, please. Please. It's not about greening a development, please. It's not, okay? It's really about, so what are the development priorities in the country? The second thing is, a lot of times, particularly out of the narrative from the West, and I do a lot of this speaking internationally, they somehow let you believe that sustainable development will be led by private companies. This is complete nonsense. Because in the notion of sustainability, there's the idea of less and constraint. Sustainable development at an individual level is me understanding maybe I should consume less. Not easy. Because the entire economic model is premised on what? Consume more and heck to everything. And the economic model is premised on making sure you can consume more tomorrow because tomorrow it'll be cheaper. How do things become cheaper? And that's the kind of last few remarks I'd like to make so that development finance people can understand when you look at approving things, what is it about sustainability that you're looking at? Anything that actually simply furthers our ability to consume more through underpricing resources is not a sustainable option. It's not sustainable. But we can have pricing regimes that make sure that marginalized people have access to resources, right? So sustainable development is essentially about policy. And policy should not be outsourced to private enterprise. Private enterprise can be a mechanism. So we can, for instance, at a national policy development level say, we want to be self-sufficient in rice production by 2030. Maybe tough, maybe 20 years. It's not easy, actually, to get from 70 to 100%. But let's just say we want to get. Then we can have development finance priorities that allow entrepreneurs who want to grow rice. Then we can put in criteria about how they use technology because we don't want all of them to be essentially using heavily chemicalized inputs. There are alternatives. We're not talking about hippie organic stuff, right? These are technologically based options. You can use drone systems to reduce chemical inputs to farms by 60%, right? So then the farmer is also healthy, right? And then we can essentially get them to be entrepreneurs linked to outputs. Then the government can say, okay, if you sign up to this scheme, you produce this amount of outputs. Or Netflix? No. But if you produce these outputs, we will guarantee buying your produce. So all of these things can be done, but we have to think differently. But the pricing issue is critical in all of this. And the price can only be guaranteed by the institutions of the state, right? So the point I'm trying to make is private enterprise cannot be the agent of change. Why? Because private enterprise wants you to buy more with money you don't have. It's called debt. And now we all know debt levels in Malaysia are very high, right? Household debt levels are among the highest. What's the debt levels in Malaysia? Household. How much? Yeah, very high percentage, right? So you want to reduce debt and you want to allow people to live within their means, but you can create structures that allow them to do that as well. So there are a couple of other points I want to make about sustainability. In the city context, sustainable development will be essentially revamping our entire transport system, for instance. Do we have road pricing in Malaysia? No. Right? Why? Because the people who control much of the automotive system do not want to see essentially reductions in how we price cars and your usage. So I say, particularly when I'm talking at a global level about these issues, car ownership is not a human right. Right? So the sustainable development issues now become even much more political. Ultimately, they are political objectives. But if we do the Malaysia Boleh way, which is the political elite have no understanding, which I would argue is perhaps true, then we can't really talk about gender and all of these issues, because ultimately sustainable development is political objectives. What do you want to do? And the political objective is driven by the development agenda. What do we want the country to look like in 30 years? And you all have to have that vision of what the country needs to look like. A couple of other points about sustainable development. It requires very tough rules. Right? Very tough rules. So if we think that the KL population at the moment is about, Greater Klang Valley, about 6 million, 7 million, should not be expanded. You need policies. You need very tough policies. If we think that the car ownership levels are too high, we need tough policies. Road pricing, you can't park anywhere. Most of us are all illegally parking. Actually, I don't have a car, so I don't break this rule. But most of us are illegally parking, etc. So when you start imposing those tough rules, then you start changing the entire transport module, right? That is what progress looks like. And then we start to finance. But let's assume as well, then you want to bring in e-vehicles. What's the percentage of e-vehicles in Malaysia? I don't know, don't even know. Not big, huh? Right. If you want to bring in that, then that development finance can help particularly lower income people have access, where it's an essential part of their livelihoods. All of these things is what I feel, development finance needs to be. What I hope, this is a much larger conversation, what I hope you all get from this is, as development finance professionals, please begin to understand the difference between sustainability as essentially the obligation of the state, which is to protect public and common goods, right? You must differentiate. And what is pollution control and all of that. Pollution control, we have laws, just enforce the laws, right? So I'll give you one example and then I'll take a few questions. For instance, I don't know if you know, but Malaysia is one of the world's largest exporters of river sand. You all know river sand? Most people probably don't even know what. Why is river sand now so expensive? And we have no real rules. But there are videos. Please, after today, go and just Google river sand exports from Malaysia. Some of our most important rivers, like Pahang River and all of these, are ecologically being destroyed by river sand exports illegally done to Taiwan, Korea, Japan, China, and the rest of the world. River sand is now so expensive. So sustainable development requires rules that do not allow these things to happen. Sustainable development is not about alternative meats. All the trendy notions about we can do all of these things. These are all fringe activities. But the core activity for a Malaysian citizen is, how am I going to live in this country in the future where my children have access to all those basic rights I talked to you about? How are we going to preserve that? Will Malaysia be a country in which the current degradation of our biodiversity will stop? Who is going to call the shots? on that. Why do we allow solar farms to be built in pristine ecosystem areas of the country? Reject this. But of course we know the problems you all face as professionals is where are the orders coming from? And I find, therefore, ultimately sustainable development is the strength of the institutions, right? The strength of the institutions. And I think the development finance institutions of Malaysia need to be the frontline defense, the best professionals who are looking at understanding the difference between simple environmental protection, development as a GDP indicator, and what is sustainable development. So please read the book. I'm not promoting it just for the sake of it. It goes deep into understanding the difference of why we need institutions that do that. And I'll finish by saying, but the institutions need to be strong. How? Structural. Structurally, they need to be divorced from the political powers. We know in Malaysia that's hard, okay? That's some realities, but they have to be. The more you say no to certain things, the more the message will become clear. And you justify it with good science, good arguments. You have to say no. Second, it has to have essentially competent people, all right? So competency is very important. You cannot be a development specialist if you don't have the basic understandings. So the competency sometimes is just through recruitment, but you can all learn as well, right? Become very well-versed in this discussion. Always ask the hard questions. Why this and why not that? And distinguish between simple ideas about sustainability and environmental protection. So environmental protection is you must not discharge your wastewater into the river. We have a standard for affluent discharge. You have to have a treatment plant, etc. And you must do that. We will test your water. Institutional weakness allows you to buy out the DOE officer. Right? That's sad, but okay. But that's pollution control and environmental degradation. Sustainable development is the development institutions, the governments of the state saying, no, we will not allow this development in this area close to this river because of the consequences, and in fact, we don't need more of this. Sustainable development is the government saying, for instance, that from now on, if you drive from Bangsar to this destination, there is a surcharge of 25 ringgit. Because of the negative impacts of pollution, congestion, and all of that. Therefore, please take public transport. Sustainable development is then tough policies that essentially ensure that we have alternative public transport systems. So I spend half my time or more in Hong Kong, right? I don't own a car. I'm not a superhero. I just know that I don't need a car in Hong Kong because everything is public transport. I can take a train and a bus anywhere I want to go, and I will not be late. That's a sustainable development, although they didn't conceive it as that when they built the MRT, the MTR. They didn't conceive of that, but it was one of probably the most visionary sustainable development investments, and then they've expanded it. So at peak hours, I can get a train literally. In the main lines, there's a train every 60 seconds. Imagine how sophisticated the system is, right? What does that do? That takes away my need to travel by personal car. That takes away all the pollution. That takes away also distortions in land use planning and many things. But most importantly, it allows productivity gains as well. I'm never late to a meeting, right? Whereas here, if you drive, all you need is a little thunderstorm, and that's it, sangkut, right? And then some people, it didn't even rain. They said there was a thunderstorm because they are late. We got all kinds of excuses, right? So that's the thing that I would like to share, and I just like to stop there, and I'm happy to take a couple of questions. I could go on for a long time. It's called Indian problem, but that's a different one. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Chandran Nair, for your thoughts and your experiences. And my respect goes to you, Mr. Chandran, because even though we have disturbance and issues, but you are still talking and giving your speech.
Yeah, it's a slight problem of talking. Yeah.
But honestly, it wasn't a sabotage from us, for men.
No, it's from
Seriously.
Up there. No, it's from there.
From there, yeah.
It's the big guys, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, and now I would like to open the floor to all the delegates in this hall for a Q&A session. And if you have any question and thoughts, please raise your hands. But kindly, please shorten your question due to the time constraint. Thank you.
Thank you very much, MC and Mr. Chandran. I have to touch on toilets,
Yes.
number one, and I've touched on foreign workers, number two.
On what?
Foreign workers.
Oh, okay.
I have a daughter who works in Dubai, and she works in a bank, and 7 years ago, there was no woman toilet in the bank.
Yeah.
But now, out of the 10-story building, there is toilets on every 3 stories. So that's the story of the toilet. But coming back to development in Malaysia, I noticed the way we build. We took note that there's not enough toilets when it comes to schools and things like that. We built the toilet, even in this hotel. The man has 4 toilets, the woman has 4 toilets. So now I'm actually linking your sustainable development with women by virtue that this is an International Women's Day.
Yeah.
My suggestion, and through our experience, women should have more toilets than the men.
Totally agree.
Because there's always a long queue. Woman takes longer in the toilet than the man. Woman
Totally
has
agree.
a lot of problem with the toilet when they are in the toilet. And at the same time, children follow us to the toilet. It's not just us going to the toilet.
I totally agree.
So,
I didn't want to say that. I thought you should say it. So, it's more credible.
So my question is, he has agreed, that's fine. Second is on foreign worker. I sit on the board of Top Glove, and we have 18,000 foreign worker.
80,000.
18,000 out of 21,000.
They're all legal?
They're all legal. They're all very well fed. They live in hostels, very good hostels. I like student hostels. But my question to you is this. We tried our best to reduce the foreign workers and bring in domestic workers.
Yes.
We recruit from IVET, which is, the training of our local workers.
Yeah.
We also pay extra for the local workers. And yet, we are not able to speed up as fast as we could. So in your opinion, from a developmental perspective, how can we actually work with this in the national agenda? Thank you.
I think, I mean, the toilet one, I totally agree with you, but I said I'm not qualified and not legitimate if I talk about those. But things like this here, you're totally right. I saw it when I went out there. It's just stupid. It's because most of the architects are men, and all these problems. But that's a different problem. We all know this problem. And those need to change. But coming to your point about foreign workers, this is a generational shift. The entire economic model of Malaysia and much of the world is essentially based on exploitation and extraction. That's the capitalist model. It doesn't mean capitalism is bad or good. It's just how do we organize our economy. So the way the discussion about economics is a long question about capitalism, but the way we organize our economies around the world, whether it be in Europe, etc., is essentially one of extraction and abuse, right? Resources, people, etc. So you mentioned the garment factories and all of that. It's all the same. Why is it done that way? It's essentially the economic model that allows you to buy things you don't need with money you don't have at a lower price. That is the seduction we have, right? We go to the supermarket, you all know, right? Buy one, get one free. How do you buy one and get one free? This is called voodoo. No, in Malaysia it's called bomo economics, right? But we have big bomo economics here, so I don't want to use the same comparison, because ours is on another level, right? But how do you buy one and get one free? The economics is essentially underprice everything. To underprice something, you have to steal the resources. So if you look at your mobile phones, for instance, coming back to mobile phones, most of you have a mobile phone. How much is an iPhone in KL these days? 4,000, 5,000 ringgit? Right? Okay. Most of the materials that go into an iPhone essentially comes from exotic areas. They don't come from Silicon Valley, right? Only the geeks come from Silicon Valley, and we don't need more of those. But the materials that come from Africa and all of those areas, rare earths, silicon, rare metals, etc. Most of that is essentially from conflict areas and underpriced. So your mobile phone, which is about, say I just say $1,000 US, right? I've argued, if you do the true economics, it's probably cost 10,000 bucks, right? Because we essentially have a system, to your point, even with the gloves or whatever product, which is essentially looks to essentially surge the consumption by underpricing it constantly. And to underprice it, we essentially have to externalize costs, be it the effluent discharge into the river, be it the conflict that take place in the Congo for the tungsten, the nickel, the silica, etc., all of that. And then, even worse, we don't price in the disposal cost, the externalities of disposal. So the whole of the system is based on essentially consumption. My first book is about consumption, and it's to underprice, externalize. So when we talk about carbon dioxide and climate change, it's just the tip of the iceberg of the economic model. What is carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide is an externality of our over-reliance on cheap fossil fuels. So the more we want to cheap fossil fuels, the more we'll create carbon, and carbon will continue to be not priced. Why don't we have a global carbon price? Because the current model essentially cannot tolerate the idea that consumption levels will need to be repriced, right? So if your mobile phone is essentially priced, as I argue, at 10,000 US, then something happens. Apple will need to think differently. So giving you a bit more, right? So these are all artificially inflated economic rents that are essentially born into the economic model. So what I'm trying to tell you is the problem we have is the sustainable development discussion is the refusal to accept that our entire economic model is essentially at war. It's at war with essentially resources. This is not an environmental discussion. I'm not from Greenpeace. It's at war with resources and people. I just gave you the example of the externalities issue in terms of the resource extraction to underprice it so that Apple can build something that allows you to upgrade at not the true cost. So that's why, most of the phones were built in China. And then everyone complained China is polluting the world. Why? Because Americans and Europeans and people like us want everything cheap, yes? And we become the dummies. We go to the supermarket, buy one, get one free. But the buy one, get one free has a social and environmental cost. Someone paid that price to allow you to consume two for the price of one. That's the economics we need to understand. That fundamentally must change if we are to deal with these issues. And that is the lie at the current discussions about sustainability. And the only way you change it is through the institutions of the state. To finally wrap up that question, the answer to that question too, so if you look at two of the most successful global companies today, in terms of market cap, etc., there might be Amazon and Apple, all right? One is a tech company. But the irony of both of these companies' entire business premise is based on essentially underpricing resources and getting consumers to buy things that they don't need. So the Apple device is designed to die on you. True? It is designed to essentially urge you to buy a new one and upgrade within a year. Whereas before, when we went and bought a rice cooker, I remember, my mom bought a rice cooker 30 years. They looked at it for like 3 weeks because it looked like a spaceship. And then they're hoping it will last for like 500 years, right? You used to buy a car on the basis that it would last. Today, the entire business model of the most tech-savvy companies is based on not only fooling you, but actually to get you to buy something that is designed to die on you. That is the terrible thing. What's the Amazon model based on? Why is everything on Amazon cheap? Because they exploit workers, right? There's lots of, you can go and, it's not me saying, it's not left-wing magazines. You can go to the New York Times to read about how the economic model of the Amazon works. But its economic success is based on externalizing the social and environmental costs. So you can look on something at Amazon, like slippers, you like the pink one, but you say, I want to try the blue and the purple too. They'll send it to you for free. And then you can return it in the United States. True, right? How does that work? What's the price of that? The carbon footprint, all of that is exploitation of the delivery workers, the postal service, and the disposal of all the plastics. No one's paying for it. And finally, can I also say that now in the pandemic, please watch, think at an individual level the next time you buy delivery food. The delivery food is part of the big problem of tech-enabled, essentially externalization of the true costs. Most of it is junk food, so please be careful. But if you're buying a salad, it's okay. But most people don't buy salads. But the entire chain is the exploitation of the worker. Look at all those people. You'll be surprised what they earn. So that you can consume what you used to buy in the shop for 5 ringgit for 4 ringgit. How does that work? The carbon, the waste, and all of that. So I never buy anything online, right? Walk, go and cook your own food. I mean, I'm not saying I'm better than anybody. It's just thinking through the costs, the plastics, the externalities. That's the business model. So to change that, we need a revolution. You got time for one more? And I'll keep the answer short. I think she's got an American question, yeah.
Okay. We have another question. Just a short one, please. Thank you.
I wanted to begin by making a comment and then follow that up with a question. So Mr. Chandran mentioned certain issues regarding development tending to have a disproportionate effect on women and girls, and you use the example of the toilets in schools. And I just wanted to comment that this goes beyond the element of physical developments, and it permeates to almost every societal rule and regulation. It goes for dress codes that are imposed that have a more profound effect on women and girls. It goes for a lack of after-school programs and reliable health care, which mostly affects working mothers, etc. And in order for these changes to take place, we must first be aware of just how nuanced sexism is, and it affects the way we learn, the way we walk the streets, our livelihood, and even the way we worship. So,
very true.
For my question, you mentioned at the beginning of your speech that you did not feel that you were qualified to speak about equality due to being male and not having that personal experience. So my question is, from the perspective of a man that considers himself to be an ally to the cause, how do you propose men do their part for the advancement of women?
Yeah, I said I'm not qualified, just to be sort of humble and move on, because I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about it. My problem is I think I'm too qualified to talk about too many things. But I was just basically saying I think there's enough people talking about, there's a lot of literature around it. What I wanted to speak about is disabuse people of this simplistic notion about sustainability. And that's why I spent a bit of time talking about pricing. How do we consume? What's the pricing, etc. So in terms of the whole issue with, to your point about gender equality, I have my views that I think there is a Western narrative to some of it, which I don't agree with. So I don't agree, and I've written about it, and if you're interested, you can find my article about it. I don't agree with all this tokenism about, 30% of the board should be women. I think this is hocus pocus nonsense, right? My mother never sat on a board, and she didn't seek equality, and she's not going to be equal, considered equal just because she sat on a board. Companies do not represent society. Boards are actually quite often silly places created by men. So when I'm talking to women, I say, why the hell do you want to go and do stupid things that men do and fraternize with them on the board? So I think this is a very Western American concept that equality is somehow measured by economic status. I don't believe in that, right? So I think you can have that, but it's all tokenism. It's good for, the corporate board people and all of that to talk about it. I think equality is more fundamental to the more nuanced things that you talked about, right? The choices people make, the way they dress, access to education, etc., and all of that. So what should men do? Not lean in. I also find that book a bit, well, less said the better. Just need to lean away, lean out, allow for space. But that, my view is, needs rules, very tough rules about how society should work. But if societies continue to be dominated by men, there will continue to be a struggle. In my own personal life, I come from a large family, 4 sisters, all older than me, so I never had the illusion that women were weaker. In fact, I said, well, how come they spanked me so much? So I didn't have that illusion. But I do think there is an economic issue which needs to be addressed, and it's the economic issues of gender that I'm interested in talking, and I don't think it's necessarily in companies or in boards. So I think at the individual level, you should be recognized. But let's also face it, that there are cultures which are very, very patriarchal, right? So
Absolutely.
And you have to address those issues. In Malaysia, this is an issue, but no one wants to talk about it.
Okay, and Mr. Chandran, I totally agree with that. And I reckon that...
I got to stop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a wrap up for the session with.
But you see, when I said the sensitive issue, you just cut me out. Right? No, I understand. Time is up. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Chandran, for the sharing. And I would like to call you to remain on stage, because I would like to invite Encik Izwan to provide a token of appreciation to Mr. Chandran. Okay, thank you once again to Mr. Chandran and Encik Izwan. Well, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed honored to have our next speaker. We begin with setting the scene of the next new normal on social compliance. We then move to debunking some ESG narratives. This third session brings to the fore the role civil society has in advancing gender equality. Allow me to introduce our distinguished next speaker, Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zain Al Abidin Ibni Tunku Muhriz.
Thank you very much. That's the one. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Very good morning, everyone. And thank you to the Association of Development Finance Institutions of Malaysia for inviting me to speak today. In previous years, I noticed it was embassies who have led the charge in terms of events on International Women's Day. So I'm glad this year that Adfim is hosting such an important conference for a Malaysian audience. And I must confess to some surprise at being invited to speak today. In the archive, I think this is the first time I've been asked to present specifically on gender equality, and like Chandran, I feel entirely unqualified, but I have been given a topic, so I shall try and keep to it. And inevitably, one of the things I did yesterday in preparing what to say today was to inspect the composition of the leadership of the organizations that I'm involved with, and walking straight into the narrative that Chandran just criticized, but that's perhaps very revealing. But I looked at the fact that at Ideas, we have a woman CEO, 6 out of the 8 senior leadership team members are women. Our charitable arm head is a woman. At Ideas Academy, it's led by a woman. Yayasan Chow Kit is led by a woman. And all of these have 50% women or more on the board. Alliance Malaysia Berhad, where I'm a director, is chaired by a woman who was also the first woman vice chancellor in Malaysia. the Institute for Diplomacy and Foreign Relations, where I'm a fellow, is led by women. My musical organizations, whether the Chopin Society or the Srimban Association of Performing Arts, led by women. Faculties which I work at the National University of Malaysia, led by women. And the former Vice-Chancellor, who I worked closely with, was also President of the National Council of Women's Organizations Malaysia. And the list can go on. But the point I'm trying to make here is that already across many sectors in Malaysia, whether it's corporate, philanthropy, academia, the arts, diplomacy, it already seems natural for many of us, and indeed automatic, to expect that there will be ever-improving gender diversity. And indeed, in some organizations, it's come to a point where a culture of seeking diversity is so ingrained that decision makers actively call out situations which may lead to a lack of diversity. I've chaired nomination committees in the past, and the consideration of recruitments and promotions tried to predict how diverse management teams and the C-suite will be a decade from today. But it's not like that everywhere yet. Many places, although many places are genuinely looking beyond box ticking by actively nurturing talent and opportunity, some organizations still do see the exercise in superficial terms. For them, it's not about harnessing the fruit of gender equality, but rather the fear of being seen to be inactive. And that's, of course, unsustainable, both tangibly and intangibly. The data and the many testimonials of senior management teams show that innovation and ultimately productivity will increase when organizations are diverse, not just across gender, but ethnicity and nationality as well. And this body of evidence is vital in equipping civil society and the community at large to push for progress in other organizations and throughout government. And indeed, despite the examples I gave earlier about ever-increasing awareness of the benefits of gender equality at the top of organizations, there are counterexamples, and I have one conundrum personally in sports. Despite constant pleading by me and other committee members, it's proven difficult to get more women on the committee of the Negeri Sembilan Squash Association, where I'm president. And I must confess to being at a loss to explain it. The membership is typically made up of parents of aspiring players, and it seems logical to me that mothers would be just as likely to want to be involved as fathers. And furthermore, the longest ever reigning world #1 squash player was a Malaysian woman, Datuk Nicole David. So perhaps there is some structural explanation that I am missing, and particularly because I'm a man and I just can't see it. I'd love to hear suggestions from the audience on this matter. But of course, a much more important area where we see this phenomenon is in politics. Less than 15% of our Dewan Rakyat is composed of women, putting us at 140th in the world, lower than Indonesia at 18%, Saudi Arabia at 20%, or the United States and Afghanistan at 24%, and well below the #1 country, Rwanda, at 61%. And of course, these figures by the Interparliamentary Union need to be taken with large caveats, since different countries have different electoral systems, different levels of corruption, and differing powers available to lawmakers. So for example, it's not very meaningful to be proud of having a legislature full of women if that legislature is virtually powerless anyway in a country headed by a dictator or autocrat. So in the system we have in Malaysia today, where the lower house of parliament, our Dewan Rakyat, is made up of individuals elected across the 222 constituencies, and these candidates are typically put forward by political parties, the question must be asked is why aren't more women being put forward as candidates? For the impending Johor state elections, for example, there are just 37 women candidates out of the total 239 candidates vying for the 56 seats. And this is perhaps easier to unpack than my conundrum at the Negeri Sembilan Squash Association, I think, which is that in Malaysia, virtually every political party is run like a fiefdom, in which the party leader solely decides who should contest where. And much, therefore, depends on the personal relationships of those party leaders with those candidates, cronies. So democratizing candidate selection thus has the dual benefit of increasing diversity and improving accountability. And although now the prevention of party hopping has taken center stage with the impending passage of an Act of Parliament, in reality, there is much reform that the political parties can do. One way is to enable party members within a constituency to select the candidates first, akin to primaries in the US or other countries. And this is also a very good way, or not a very good way, but an additional way to prevent representatives from changing parties without a very good reason indeed. And this is because if the loyalty of a candidate is merely upwards to a party leader, then all it takes is another party leader to make a more enticing offer, which is why you have so many frogs. But if the loyalty is downwards towards party members in their constituency, they're much less likely to be bought over by a rival party leader. And having said this, there are also cases where the cause of diversity can be advanced through preferential candidates lists, which can be considered by selection committees. And these are just some of the ideas that various think tanks have put forward. And there is no good reason why the representation of women in our legislature should not resemble the composition of the country as a whole, the population of a country in which they are supposed to legislate for and serve. Now, going back a few years, when I used to work at the World Bank back in 2006, my colleagues from other countries were always marveling at Malaysia's progressiveness. At the time, we had the MITI minister, the Bank Negara governor, and many heads of policy and academic institutions who were women. And today, we have a chief justice who is a woman who seems to enjoy the confidence of the public in light of recent judicial decisions. But we must segue into an oft-made related point, which is that sometimes merely having gender equality is no guarantee of performance or integrity, and I think this relates to the point made about quotas and the point made earlier about tokenism. And the most stinging criticism comes from those who point out examples where quotas have been used to promote minorities only for those individuals to fall short of expectations. And then this creates a whole culture of denigration of people who have made it because of, or perceived to have been appointed because of quotas. So going back to my example earlier of the nomination committees, that is why ambitions towards diversity must have a much longer time horizon. And what is that ultimate long-term plan? Some might say it's culture, right? So examples from the home, in society, in popular media. But another one, undoubtedly, is education. Now, in general, in Malaysia, girls have always had access to education, which is why it's distressing that some Malaysian politicians have expressed support for governments which prevent girls' education. But in recent years, we've seen terrible allegations of bullying against girls, and even more horrifyingly, cases of sexual abuse by teachers and other figures in authority. And the point Chandran made about sanitation and access to toilets in schools is yet another, perhaps less visible, but actually on a daily basis, much more important area of structural discrimination against girls. And if girls grow up in an environment where men can humiliate and abuse girls with impunity, then the damage to society will only be amplified later on. But staying in education, you also have some other interesting statistics. It's been noted for some years that enrollment in Malaysian universities has been heavily skewed in favor of women. And the reasons for this have not been definitively answered, but it might suggest that men are still able to succeed in our society without that higher education, whereas women need it in order to succeed. And it begs the question of how rewards are distributed, whether talent and merit can be abandoned in favor of corruption and cronyism, and whether men tend to benefit from that more than women. In any case, the academic gender imbalance further highlights the absurdity of the political imbalance, at least if you think that the people in parliament should ideally be well educated. The other gender imbalance, which doesn't reflect university composition, is the gender pay gap. As has been pointed out, there can be many factors that may lead to a situation where people with the same job functions or same job title may be paid different wages. And sometimes preferences among certain groups do seem to exist. But then again, much can be attributed to cultural expectations as well, such as of women of childbearing age bowing out of the workplace. In the first instance, transparency is an important tool in exposing employer practices as well as employee expectations. An Instagram account called Malaysian Pay Gap is facilitating precisely such a movement and is already contributing to the debates about the pay gap and minimum wage. Incidentally, my colleagues at Ideas argued recently that the minimum wage should be raised every 2 years to reflect the economy. And this obviously has a gender impact when you consider that in general it's women who are on the minimum wage in the first place. Another initiative, which was much discussed in the policymaking space before COVID-19, normalized working from home, was incentives for companies to provide care centers at work, which would potentially encourage many more mothers to remain in or return to employment. An even more fundamental question that hasn't been adequately researched is the cost of childcare in the first place, i.e., what percentage of household expenditure is spent on children, especially within Malaysian cities. If we were to calculate that and reflect for it in policy, it could be a game changer in terms of recognizing talented women who aren't presently in the workforce because of family commitments. Thus, often the institutional reforms sought by civil society which aim to improve policies for everyone have a particularly profound impact for women. Another example is Undi 18 and automatic voter registration, which will enable a new generation of young female voters to express their particular electoral preferences on gender issues. But in reality, all of Malaysian civil society owes a debt of gratitude to pioneering activists and advocates who provide the earliest examples of successful civil society organization. Earlier, I mentioned the National Council of Women's Organizations. Others like it, like the women's wings of volunteer organizations, and yes, even political parties, have long been important platforms to discuss women's issues, and ultimately, their work percolates into policy making itself. And I'm proud to point out that the first Raja Pemaisuri Agong was an early advocate of these groups, being a founder, president, or patron of Majlis Kebajikan Wanita Islam, the Women's Institute, Lembaga Kebajikan Perempuan Islam Malaysia, and the Girl Guides Association of Malaysia. And of course, Tunku Kursyah today is better known through the school, which bears her name, which has produced many of the nation's women leaders. But perhaps an early example of direct legislative change from civil society relates to the enactment of the Domestic Violence Act 1994, which was the direct result of advocacy from organizations and coalitions such as the Joint Action Group for Gender Equality, All Women's Action Society, Sisters in Islam, Women's Aid Organization, Women's Center for Change Penang, and so many others. And today, these organizations, or their successors, are also working hard to stop child marriage and the prevention of the unilateral conversion of minors, of which we have seen much activity in policy and in the courts in the last few weeks. Similarly, at the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, although 99% of those infected were men, it was women's organizations who highlighted that these men had wives and girlfriends and children who would also be affected and campaigned for their protection as well. These days, it's groups like Family Frontiers who have helped secure the hugely significant milestone that mothers are now able to pass on their Malaysian citizenship to their children, which is an issue that resonates strongly with the children and families of Yayasan Chow Kit. And I would hope that the work we do at Ideas towards a Malaysia based on liberty and justice within our pillars of economics and business, public finance, democracy and governance, and social policy pays homage to the trailblazing organizations that paved the way for research-based advocacy and so often for causes related to women. I would like to end my speech by addressing a tiresome criticism leveled against many CSOs, often regarded as being too liberal or Western-oriented for Malaysia. And indeed, one often encounters the allegation that human rights and democracy are just code words for a new kind of Western imperialism. To them, I say, talk to the people, the Malaysians of all backgrounds, whose lives have been substantially improved because of changes to the law and to policies motivated by these very principles of human rights and democracy. And finally, as someone from Negeri Sembilan, a lot of us point out that from the 14th century, Minangkabau civilization always had elements of elections, consensus, decentralization, and check and balance institutions developed indigenously without any influence from the West. So the idea that the roots of democracy are exclusively Western are false, and to rebel against them just for this reason is dangerous indeed. And of course, the other famous aspect of Adat Perpate of Negeri Sembilan is its matrilinealism. And anthropologists and sociologists alike have studied how the empowerment of women, from land ownership to entrepreneurship to playing the role of mediator, has been institutionalized as a result of the unique heritage that carries. This should be part of the Malaysian story on gender equality, and I hope that Adfim, together with civil society, will continue to ensure that policies and legislation on gender equality are forward-looking, sustainable, and appropriate to a brighter Malaysia that we all jointly hope for. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zain Al-Abidin Ibni Tuanku Muhriz. And now, as usual, I would like to open the floor for Q&A session. But kindly make it shortened, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Fairuz. Quick question on gender equality and civil society. Do you, in your view of leading ideas, believe that the two components of gender equality and civil society has bearing on the state of democracy in a country? Therefore, there is a correlation or causality between how gender equality and or civil society operates in any form of democracy. Thanks.
Absolutely. I think ideas doesn't have an institutional view on this, but I think my view is that it absolutely does. And in my speech, I mentioned the scandal that there is that the representation of women in parliament is so low. I think that if we are going to have policies that truly reflect the desires and needs of the entire Malaysian population, that the body that represents them resembles the Malaysian population at large. So I think that's the first thing. But in terms of institutional reform of Parliament, I think one of the things that the ideas has been working on in the last couple of years is, for example, the creation and the institutionalization of more parliamentary select committees and to standardize and to regularize the process of policy making, so that you have a culture of green papers and white papers and consultations, because those platforms and those opportunities for members of the public and civil society in particular to criticize legislation, to help improve legislation, particularly in the absence of good representation in Parliament, provides such an important avenue for those blind spots to be aired, right? And of course, this requires a free media as well. So I think it goes without saying that having healthy culture of free media will facilitate that. But certainly, when going back to the point about the passage of the Domestic Violence Act 1994, which was such a landmark piece of legislation, never mind what the topic was, but a landmark piece of legislation that was achieved by civil society, I think that is only makes the case stronger for much greater interface between civil society and parliamentarians. And in the, when the Speaker of the Parliament, when Tan Sri Arif was Speaker, I take off my hat to him, because he was the first to actually recognize that there was a role and a place for civil society in Parliament, regardless of what the government of the day thought. So.
Sorry, I don't normally do follow-up questions. Just on your point on civil society and how egregious it is in Malaysia, but one of the main criticisms Pakatan Harapan faced when it came on board was the civil societies who were so vigorously fighting Barisan Nasional joined the government. So there was no civil society keeping the government on its toes. So there is also that fine line between there is a fine line between the loyalty of civil society towards its cause, exactly who's driving its cause. I think we don't have time for that, but it's something to think about.
No, absolutely. I guess a short follow-up answer as well. I think at the beginning of this conference, a gentleman came up to me and said, I'm very disappointed with one of your colleagues because he went on to join politics. And I see that as well, right? And I think actually those of us and my friends and colleagues who remain in civil society, we're not become much more self-aware of that, because we look at our former friends and colleagues who were once upon a time so noble and righteous as civil society activists who have gone into politics. Their own personal incentives have now completely changed. And I think that's why I keep making the point, sometimes people ask, oh, why don't you go into politics? I'm like, look, I don't want to become like that, because I want to stay true to, of course, I have my own beliefs and principles and others will disagree with that. That's fine. But the moment I join a political party, or the moment that any one of us joins a political party, you get sucked into that, and you will compromise your principles. And I think the ability to say no is a necessary step to preserve the health of Malaysian civil society.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ferris, for the question, and I hope it answered. And we open one more question from the floor.
Yes.
Great speech. I have to ask this question before I leave. We talk about gender, and you've very eloquently talked about those issues, but I feel you've glossed over the race issue, because that plays totally into how gender issues manifest themselves in the country. I know it's an unfair question, but I just think it's important, even in a discussion like this, to understand that. You talked about your colleague who left, and he became racist almost. So we cannot talk about gender in Malaysia without talking about the racialization of everything in the country, including board members.
Are the lights going to go off now? I mean, you're right, but what should I say? I mean, I think there's a lot I could say, and there's a lot that has to be addressed and improved, and we need to de-racialize many institutions. I think what I would say is, I think history is on our side, right? Because this situation that we have today was never envisaged, it was never intended by those framers of the Constitution and by those who espouse the spirit of Merdeka. That, of course, is something that we at Ideas, and me personally, we take that very, very seriously. So we go back to the words of, I mean, in particular, in this regard, we go back to the words of Tun Dr. Ismail, right? And Tunku Abdul Rahman, of course, who would be rolling in their graves at the kind of, and it's not even racialism, it's supremacism that is ongoing. And I think we can look at numerous countries around the world and say with clarity that these things are not sustainable and will lead and could lead to the destruction of the country that we love. So I think that we should use history as a guide and remind those who would want to be supremacist and believe in a perpetually dominant, who believe in perpetual dominance, that actually, those very people who achieved independence so that we can be here today did not believe that. I hope that's okay.
Okay. Okay, I open one more last question, and I saw Arisen at the back. Okay, please. Encik Badri, can you forward the mic to
the gentleman over there?
I'm changing microphone. Okay, this works better. So perhaps you can elucidate us on this stuff. Thank you.
I can't. I mean, I don't know anything. I don't know why. Like you, I have observed from a very young age the propensity for Clantonese women to be particularly outgoing and entrepreneurial and successful, but I can't explain it. As for the point about adat prapatih and inheritance, I mean, I think, again, that requires another session altogether. The point I was making is quite a more a broad one, which is that, yes, because of adat prapatih, there's always been this tradition in Negeri Sembilan and before that in Minangkabau civilization that it's normal for women to inherit property. And then to provide for family and the community. But I don't think I'm in a position to comment on the specificities of that here, so I'm sorry. Sorry, yeah, but thank you.
Well, I think that answered your question. Okay, and I think that wraps up for the session with Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zain Al-Abidin Ibni Tunku Muhriz. And I would like to call Yang Mulia to remain on stage, and I would like to invite Encik Izwan once again to provide a token of appreciation. Okay, thank you once again to Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zain Al-Abidin Ibni Tunku Muhriz and also Encik Izwan. And that, ladies and gentlemen, wraps up for our morning session. We shall meet again after the lunch at 2:30 for a forum discussion with 5 extraordinary panelists to share their ideas and knowledge on gender equality today for a sustainable tomorrow. So we will be right back after the break. And to all the VIP guests, kindly proceed to Central Ballroom A on the left side of the hall. And to the rest of the delegates and guests, we have a set of bento lunch just next to the hall. And you may bring in and enjoy them at your convenience. And to those who would like to perform salah, we have a prayer room at level P1. And I'll see you in the next session, inshallah.